Ben, the contract has been signed. As agreed, we will customize a staged death service for you in 17 days. Inside the reception room, the staff handed the freshly drafted paper contract to Ben. He took it and casually flipped through it, confirming with him again, "Does the fake corpse look like me?" The staff patted their chest, appearing very confident. "Rest assured, the corpse is custom-made to match your figure exactly. No one will suspect a thing." Reassured, Ben finally relaxed. He took out a card from his bag and, with a generous wave, paid the bill promptly before turning to leave. Stepping outside, the first thing that caught his eye was a luxurious, extended Lincoln limousine. The driver, who had been waiting patiently, saw Ben emerge and hurriedly opened the car door respectfully. "Ben," he nodded in response, stepping directly into the car's plush back seat. The driver closed the door for him before returning to the driver's seat and restarting the vehicle. The car traveled smoothly, eventually stopping outside the Ben family villa. This was the house Ben had specifically bought to live with Amy. A slender woman walked in, dressed in a white, figure-hugging dress. Her aloof silhouette was straight as a pine tree. Her features were exquisite, but her demeanor was indifferent and unapproachable. She leisurely smoothed her skirt, walking directly towards Ben. She grabbed his arm and started pulling him towards the bedroom. "Amy, wait." Unexpectedly, he reacted strongly the next second, struggling to pull his hand free from her grasp. Amy's eyes, as deep and cool as moonlight, stared intently at him, seemingly confused by his behavior. "Don't want to? Isn't me sleeping with you every day the condition you set when you bought me?" "Recently. Not for now. I'm a little tired lately." Ben lowered his head, telling a lie, his words mumbled and unclear. Fortunately, she didn't seem to care, simply saying faintly, "Then I'll go be busy." Amy had indeed been busy lately. She was currently preparing to start a project, and it was at a critical stage. He didn't stop her, nodding and letting her leave. Ben thought she would be busy all night, but before long, she answered a phone call and hurried out of the study again. Seeing him still in the living room, her steps faltered. "Since you don't want it tonight, I'm going out. I have something important to handle." Looking at the rare trace of urgency on her indifferent face, Ben had his answer. What important matter? It was just for Chris. But he said nothing, only nodded. Having received permission, Amy didn't linger, brushing past him as she hurried away. She reached the door, about to push it open and leave, when he suddenly called out to her. "Amy, actually, you don't have to do this anymore." Hearing his voice, Amy subconsciously stopped and stood there with a frown, waiting for him to finish. But his voice faltered, silenced by her somewhat impatient gaze. "Go ahead." In the end, he didn't say the rest of what he wanted to say, only telling her to leave first. Not until her silhouette had completely disappeared into the darkness did he murmur again, "Actually, you won't have to do this anymore because I'll be leaving soon." Ben, as a young master from a wealthy Beijing family, was rich, handsome, and well-built. He had done many absurd things. But the most absurd of all was buying a girlfriend with money during his freshman year. She was the famous campus belle of Beijing University, coveted by countless boys. The number of people chasing her stretched from campus to off-campus. But she was indifferent and aloof, rejecting everyone equally, spending her days only on classes and part-time jobs. Ben fell in love with Amy at first sight, wanting only to pluck this unattainable flower and possess her. So, after learning that her parents had passed away, that she had been raised by her grandmother since childhood, and that her grandmother had been bedridden in recent years, and that she was busy with part-time jobs just to pay for her grandmother's medical expenses, he found Amy and made a deal with her. He would pay her grandmother's medical expenses, and she would be his girlfriend, returning home on time every day and indulging in intimacy with him according to the agreed frequency, until he grew tired of her. At that time, her grandmother's condition was serious, and she urgently needed a large sum of money to save her only relative. So, she agreed. Now, 5 years have passed. Ben and Amy have both graduated from university and started working, but their relationship has not changed. Amy's grandmother has not yet been cured, and he hasn't grown tired of her. She still lives in his villa. Her attitude towards him remains the same, still so cold. He isn't discouraged, thinking only that if enough time passes, he will eventually warm her heart. Until recently, when he accidentally fell down the stairs and hit his head, he unexpectedly awakened, realizing that he was actually living in a novel. The female lead was Amy. The male lead was her childhood sweetheart, Chris. And he was just a villainous supporting character. According to the plot of the novel, the startup project that Amy was preparing for recently would be a great success in 17 days. Amy would also become a new business star because of this project, and later, she would soar to the top, standing at the pinnacle of the business world. And the first thing she would do after her success was give him a large sum of money and break up with him. But he would disagree and pester Amy relentlessly. Later, after seeing her and Chris grow closer, he would become jealous, repeatedly making things difficult for her and harming Chris, eventually being completely abandoned by Amy and ending up dying tragically in the streets. Ben didn't want to believe such an absurd thing, let alone believe that he would do such a foolish thing. But almost every event that had happened recently was following the plot of the novel. And Amy repeatedly leaving him to find Chris also made him understand that the male and female leads were destined to fall in love. After agonizing for a whole week, he finally figured it out. He couldn't gamble with his life. In order to completely get rid of the plot and to change his final ending, Ben finally made a decision. He couldn't love her anymore. He had to fake his death and leave this place, leave Amy. Recalling the events that would happen in the future, Ben tossed and turned for a whole night. That night, Amy didn't come back, and Ben didn't call her to ask about the situation. The next day, he got up early, washed up, and went downstairs to eat breakfast alone. The villa was very quiet, with only the sound of him chewing slowly as he ate. It wasn't until he finished breakfast that the butler approached him hesitantly. All the servants have been dismissed as instructed, and I will be returning to the old mansion today as well. Young master, do you really not need any servants? No, I don't. Ben shook his head, because he wouldn't be here soon. Looking at the butler's worried gaze, he didn't explain too much, but went upstairs to get a letter and handed it to the butler, asking him to be sure to deliver it to his parents. He was afraid that his parents would be too heartbroken after he faked his death and left. So he explained clearly in the letter that he was preparing to fake his death. The letter clearly stated that 17 days later, he would go abroad to live in anonymity, telling his parents not to worry and that he would secretly come back to visit them when the time was right. Ben had considered taking his parents with him, but after all, they were getting old, and their foundation was here. Moreover, the fact that he had awakened was too absurd, and it would be impossible to explain it clearly in a few words. They would only think he was crazy. Moreover, if both Ben's father and Ben's mother disappeared together, Ben worried that Amy would become suspicious. After careful consideration, he finally decided to leave his parents here and depart alone. Having arranged everything on his end, Ben began to organize matters concerning Amy. After dismissing all the servants, he went to see Amy's grandmother, carrying fruit. He didn't act like a young master at all. Over the years, he would visit Amy's grandmother whenever he had free time, always bringing the old woman many things, making her happy, talking to her, keeping her company, and even teaching her how to use a mobile phone so she could see the world without leaving her home. Therefore, in contrast to Amy's indifference, Amy's grandmother liked Ben very much. Ben, when are you and Amy planning to get married? When Amy's grandmother brought up this question again, the embarrassed look that used to appear on Ben's face was gone, replaced only by a wry smile. How could they possibly get married? Not to mention, he would be leaving in 17 days. Even if he didn't leave, he would probably just end up with the same ending as in the original book. The person Amy loved was Chris. How could she possibly marry him? Seeing that he didn't speak, Amy's grandmother couldn't help but sigh, still trying to comfort Ben. I know my granddaughter. Amy isn't completely without feelings for you. It's just that the initial reason you two were together wasn't pure. There's definitely a barrier in her heart. As long as that barrier is removed, you can definitely be happy together. Ben forced a smile as he listened to Amy's grandmother's words of comfort. He knew the plot of the original book, and he also knew that the person Amy loved from beginning to end was only Chris. The female lead only loves the male lead. How could she fall for a villainous male supporting character? In the end, he didn't say anything and didn't refute Amy's grandmother's words. He just took out a card. Grandma, please give this card to Amy when you have the chance. This card was originally a venture capital fund he had prepared for Amy a long time ago, but he had been hesitant about how to give it to her, fearing it would hurt her pride. Now that he had awakened his consciousness and decided to leave, he would just have Amy's grandmother pass it on. Hopefully, Amy would think a little fondly of him this way, so that after he faked his death, she wouldn't do anything too extreme to his body. Amy's grandmother saw that something was wrong with Ben at a glance and said with some worry, "Did you and Amy quarrel again?" Ben shook his head. "We didn't quarrel. It's just that I'm going to a very far place in a while." Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by a cold voice. "What very far place are you going to?" And standing next to her was Chris. Ben looked away and casually made up an excuse to brush it off. "I'm going on a trip in a while." In Amy's eyes, the two things he liked to do most were sleeping with her and traveling all over the world. So, hearing his answer, she composed herself and didn't ask further. She naturally took Chris to sit by Amy's grandmother's bedside, subtly squeezing Ben to the farthest edge. "Grandma, you don't know, Sister Amy is so stingy. I just wanted to eat an ice cream on the way here, but Sister Amy wouldn't buy it for me. You have to talk to her." Amy glanced at Chris helplessly. Although her words were a rebuttal, they were filled with concern for him. "And you're still talking? Have you forgotten about your stomach problems again? You still dare to eat cold things? And who was the one who swore after the last time you had stomach pains that you would never dare to eat cold things again and asked me to supervise you?" Chris grinned and winked. Her eyes were filled with nothing but doting. Even though there were 4 people present, once Amy and Chris arrived, her eyes were only on him the entire time. Ben, squeezed far at the end, looked at the harmonious and natural atmosphere between them and couldn't help but laugh mockingly at himself. It was always like this. He was forever the outsider among them. But he wouldn't feel as sad as before. This time, he let go of everything, let go of Amy, and also let go of all his love for her, completely returning her to the male lead. Amy's grandmother noticed the fleeting loneliness in Ben's eyes and glanced at Amy, who was deliberately ignoring him, and sighed inwardly. "Amy, Ben, I want to eat grapes. Can you wash some for me?" Since Amy's grandmother had spoken, Ben and Amy naturally wouldn't refuse. She took the fruit basket from the bedside, and he followed her out of the ward. But as soon as they stepped out of the door, he was grabbed by the hand. Ben was a little surprised that she had taken the initiative to touch him today. In the next moment, he heard her cold words, "Don't visit Grandma so often in the future. It's true that I sold myself to you, but my grandma didn't." Those short words made his previous thoughts seem like a joke. His heart felt slightly bitter. If it were before, he would have immediately explained to her that she had been very busy lately, and Amy's grandmother was getting old and easily lonely. He had no other intentions, just wanted to spend more time with Amy's grandmother. But now he just lowered his head and said calmly, "Okay." After speaking, he went directly to the water room without waiting for her, unlike before when he had to go with her. Looking at his retreating back, a strange feeling rose in Amy's heart. Since yesterday, his actions seemed to have started to change. "Amy, Ben, it's almost lunchtime now. Why don't we go eat together?" Amy naturally wouldn't refuse Chris's suggestion. As for Ben, perhaps she didn't want him to throw a young master's tantrum and make things difficult for Chris. Before he could even open his mouth, she directly agreed for him. After arriving at the restaurant, the group followed the waiter into a private room. She readily took the menu and ordered dishes. But it wasn't until all the dishes were served that Ben realized that she had ordered all of Chris's favorite dishes. Perhaps this was the difference between love and lack of love. Even though he had once asked her to remember all his preferences, one was forced, and the other was from the heart, which was simply a world of difference. Fortunately, Ben had anticipated this result from the beginning and wasn't very disappointed, only eating in silence, saying nothing. Halfway through the meal, a rapid phone ring echoed in the private room. Amy took the phone and walked out. Ben, however, was stunned for a moment when he saw the pinky ring on Chris's hand as he ladled soup. "Where did you get that pinky ring?" Chris glanced at the pinky ring on his little finger, seemingly oblivious, and replied with a smile. "Oh, this? Amy gave it to me. I said it looked nice, so she gave it to me." Hearing this, Ben's face instantly turned ugly. This pinky ring was a gift that he had meticulously crafted for a long time, hurting his hands, and finally personally given to Amy on their anniversary. Inside the pinky ring was engraved a line of small words. Ben will always love Amy. He dissected his heart and offered his love to her nakedly, but she didn't care and casually gave it to Chris. An inexplicable surge of nameless anger rose in his heart, but the next moment, the plot of the original book reappeared in his mind. The person Amy liked was originally Chris, so she naturally wouldn't care about the things he gave her. If you were to fuss over these things now, wouldn't that make Amy hate him even more? It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, and he instantly calmed down, restrained his expression, and smiled slightly. It looks very good, and it suits you very well. Chris was waiting for him to lose his temper, but who knew he would so calmly gloss over the matter, a flash of surprise momentarily crossing his eyes. He gritted his teeth, suddenly stood up, and diligently ladled a bowl of soup for Ben. Ben, don't just focus on the rice. This seafood soup is good, try it. Ben was allergic to seafood and was about to refuse, but he saw that Chris didn't hand him the soup, but twisted his wrist, and the soup bowl smashed onto the floor with a paw sound. His eyes were full of grievance. The corners of his eyes were red, looking as if he was about to cry. Before Ben could react to what Chris was up to, Amy rushed past him like a gust of wind, protecting Chris behind her. Immediately, her ice-cold gaze shot straight at him. Ben, what are you doing? Chris stood behind her with reddened eyes, adding fuel to the fire at the right moment. Amy, it's all my fault. I made Ben angry. That's why Ben splashed the soup on me in anger. I just got scalded a little. It's okay, don't blame him. I didn't. Ben's eyes widened as he tried to explain, hearing him distort the facts, but she turned a deaf ear, gave him a cold look, and after leaving the sentence, Ben, you're simply unreasonable. She silently grabbed Chris and left. Watching her cold back and Chris's provocative gaze, Ben stood frozen in place, his heart sinking to the bottom. What he didn't expect was that in the following days, Chris seemed to have discovered that this trick worked well and became addicted to framing him. Sometimes he said that Ben had gotten him fired from his job. Sometimes he said that Ben had ordered the entire industry to blacklist him. And sometimes he said that Ben had people throw pain at his door, making it impossible for him to have peace. Amy endured it again and again, finally unable to bear it anymore, and grabbed Ben as soon as she got home. Ben, if you have a problem, come at me. Why are you targeting Chris? Having been in a relationship for 5 years, Amy's attitude towards him had always been cold. This was the first time Ben had seen her show such emotional expression, but it was to stand up for Chris. I didn't target him. I didn't do those things. He tried his best to explain, but she still looked like she didn't believe him. If it wasn't you, who else could it be? You can even buy a girlfriend. What else are you incapable of doing? Don't let this happen again. I've given you everything. Why won't you let go of the people around me? After leaving these words, Amy left in disappointment, unwilling to say another word to him, and went straight to the guest room. Ben watched her leaving figure, desperately suppressing the sadness in his heart. In her heart, he was always the one she didn't trust. But besides sadness, he felt more fear. He only had a few days left before he would leave. But if things continued like this, he was afraid that he would be killed by Amy before the fake death date arrived. He tossed and turned in bed for half the night, thinking it over and over, and finally came up with an idea. That night, he drove to Chris's residence. The first thing he said was, "Chris, let's make peace. From now on, I'll help you get together with Amy." Upon hearing this, Chris's eyes widened in disbelief. What nonsense are you talking about? Chris knew better than anyone how much Ben loved Amy. Otherwise, why would he willingly pay for Amy's grandmother's medical expenses for 5 years? And why would he still follow her without complaint after being rejected by Amy with a cold face time and time again? But now, Ben had actually taken the initiative to come to him, saying that he wanted to bring him and Amy together. Hearing his question, Ben shook his head. "I'm not talking nonsense. I'm sincerely trying to make peace with you. You don't need to bother framing me anymore. I don't have much time left. I'll be leaving Amy soon. You don't need to see me as a rival in love." He didn't seem to be faking it, but Chris still didn't believe him, suspecting some kind of trap. Ben didn't care whether he believed him or not. He simply acted. The next day, he stopped Amy as she was about to leave, handing her a ticket to Universal Studios. "I bought 2 tickets to Universal Studios tonight. Will you come with me? I'm busy with a project lately." Her expression was cold, but he interrupted her before she could finish her refusal. It was part of our deal that, besides the daily sex, you couldn't refuse any of my requests. That one sentence blocked all of Amy's rejections. Frowning, she took the ticket, but quickened her pace as she left. Watching her figure gradually disappear, Ben picked up his phone, found Chris's number, and dialed it. The call was quickly answered. Without any pleasantries, he got straight to the point. "You got the ticket I sent over, right? I gave the other ticket to Amy. Dress nicely today and work on improving your relationship with her." Chris hadn't expected Ben to actually try to set him up with Amy. He gave a hesitant, and just as Ben was about to hang up, he suddenly spoke. "Why are you helping me?" The question reached Ben's ears through the phone. He was silent for a moment, but ultimately didn't answer. "You don't need to know that. Just do as we agreed. I'll set you up, and you won't frame me anymore." The phone hung up, and he stared blankly at the screen as it faded to black. He couldn't help but recall Chris's question from earlier. "Why are you helping me?" He wasn't helping Chris. The person he truly wanted to help was himself. Besides, Amy's true affections lay with Chris. He was simply accelerating the original plot and also giving himself a way out. As the sky grew completely dark, Ben received a message from Chris. It was a photo of them together. In the photo, Chris was looking at the camera, and Amy was looking at Chris. Her eyes were filled with tenderness and sweetness, an expression he never saw when they were alone. In the 5 years they had been together, he had asked countless times for a picture together, but her answer was always, "I don't like taking pictures." Apparently, principles could be broken when facing someone you liked. He scrolled further down the photos and was drawn to one in particular. The background was a restaurant, and in front of her were shelled shrimp meat and a pile of shrimp shells. He remembered that throughout their years together, he had always shelled the shrimp and placed the meat in her bowl, but she had never shelled one for him. Looking at these displays of affection he had once yearned for, he was silent for a long time before typing a message. "Good, you look good together." Chris had always thought Ben was doing these things for ulterior motives and had deliberately sent these photos to provoke him, hoping to reveal his true purpose. But this sentence, containing a blessing, made Chris realize that he completely didn't understand him. The typing indicator appeared in the chat box for a long time. Chris revised his message countless times before finally sending a sentence. "Was what you said yesterday true? Are you really planning to set me up with Sister Amy?" This time, he replied quickly with a single word. "Yes. From now on, Amy is yours." Ben had expected Amy to be happy when she came home today, but when she pushed open the door, she was still cold and indifferent, her tone even tinged with an inexplicable anger. "Ben, what do you mean by what you did today? What are you up to again?" He paused, confused by her attitude, but explained, "You mean the tickets? Something came up, so I couldn't go. I gave the tickets to Chris." Having said that, he asked earnestly, "Did you have fun today? Did you ride the Ferris wheel for couples? Did you go to the haunted house? If you didn't enjoy it enough, I have 2 more tickets. You can go with them again tomorrow." Amy couldn't figure out what his purpose was and stared at him for a long time. But he looked at her with sincerity, as if he really just couldn't spare the time, and gave the tickets to her and Chris. After a long while, she was the first to give in and went straight into the room. This time the matchmaking was successful. Ben continued his efforts, continuing to create various opportunities for them. For example, he invited her to a couple's restaurant, but as soon as they sat down, Chris walked up to them with a face full of surprise. "Sister Amy, what a coincidence." Before she could speak, the waiter came forward at the right time. "Sir, madam, this year is our store's anniversary. You are the 52nd couple to enter the store, and we will give you a pair of couple rings and take a couple photo for you." As soon as the waiter finished speaking, Ben suddenly stood up. "I suddenly feel a little unwell, so I'll go back first." Seeing him get up to leave, Amy quickly got up to follow, but he seemed to suddenly remember something and turned to look at Amy again. "Winning the lottery is a good thing. It would be a pity to waste it. Amy, why don't you and Chris go?" After speaking, he didn't wait for Amy to react and hurriedly left the restaurant, driving away quickly, leaving Amy stunned in place and Chris excited, pulling her to go and receive the couple rings and take a couple photo. Another example was that a university classmate held a class reunion, and Ben insisted on dragging Amy along. When they arrived, they discovered that Chris was also there. At the end, he took the initiative to push Chris in front of her. It's not safe for him to go home alone so late. You should drive him back first. I'll take a taxi. All right, don't rush back. He's drunk. Take care of him at his house. After speaking, he shoved the car keys into her hands without explanation and walked straight to the side of the road to hail a taxi. After a few times like this, Amy finally noticed the anomaly. During this time, she could always meet Chris in various occasions and at various times. And every time, Ben would leave alone, leaving her and Chris. It was as if he wanted to push her to Chris. A few days later, Amy returned home drunk from socializing. Seeing that Ben was lying in bed and seemed to have fallen asleep, she went straight to the bathroom without saying a word. As the sound of rushing water sounded, Ben suddenly opened his eyes. Looking back at the closed bathroom door, he quickly took out his phone and found a number, "Come to my villa right now." 20 minutes later, Chris knocked on the door of Ben's villa. Ben quietly came out to open the door for him and handed him the silk pajamas he had just found. "Change into this and go sleep in the master bedroom." Chris listened to his words and looked at the pajamas in his hand. He seemed to understand something, and his heart was pounding as if it was about to jump out of his chest. Urged again by Ben, he came back to his senses, quickly went upstairs, changed into the pajamas, and lay down on the bed. Chris had only just laid down for a short time when the bathroom door was suddenly pulled open, and Amy walked out wrapped in only a bath towel, wiping her hair. She looked up, her eyes stopping when they met the figure on the bed. Perhaps thinking that it had been a long time since they had fulfilled their initial agreement, she took a few steps forward and hugged the person from behind very naturally, her voice with a hint of drunken hoarseness. "My period is over." Chris hadn't yet processed the meaning of the words when he felt the space behind him give way slightly. Burning breath ghosted over the back of his neck, and a soft, boneless hand instantly settled on his waist. The scalding heat made him shudder involuntarily, his breathing quickening. A light laugh sounded from behind, and a dense rain of kisses fell on the back of his ear and the side of his neck. Chris couldn't withstand such an assault. He couldn't help but groan. At that single sound, Amy froze. She abruptly pulled away, her voice filled with disbelief. "Chris!" In the living room downstairs, Amy sat on the sofa, Chris beside her, draped in a blanket, his face etched with embarrassment. Her face was ashen, her gaze fixed on Ben, who stood nearby. What exactly is going on? Ben hadn't expected her to discover the situation so quickly and felt a twinge of guilt. But he still concocted an excuse to try and cover things up. Chris's house lost power, so I let him stay here for the night. Then why was he sleeping in a master bedroom? Amy clearly didn't believe his reason, pressing for an answer. Ben hesitated for a moment before replying. "The guest room hasn't been cleaned yet. I thought it was just for one night, so I let him sleep in the master bedroom." Her gaze held anger, her chest heaving violently. She clearly didn't believe his explanation, but the most important thing now was to get Chris home. She forcefully suppressed her anger, not speaking, and silently pulled Chris away. When Amy returned, Ben had already gone back to the bedroom. Now that they were alone in the room, she no longer restrained her anger. Amy had noticed Ben's strange behavior for some time now. Until this moment, she had finally reached her limit. "Ben, what exactly are you trying to do? What? Have you come up with some new way to torment us?" Her undisguised words startled him. Ben hadn't expected her to think this way, and his heart felt like it had been struck a heavy blow, both painful and stifling. "I just thought I wanted to." The words of explanation tumbled out, but luckily he regained his composure and didn't blur out the rest. Her gaze was deep and unwavering, and she continued to press. "You want to what? Tell me. I'm sorry. I thought you would like it." His apology became the last straw, igniting the fire in her heart. "You're always so self-righteous." She coldly dropped those words, and with a chilling aura, turned and left the bedroom. Ben watched her retreating figure, dimly understanding something. That's right, she was still his. With her character and principles, even if she liked Chris, she wouldn't do anything with him. Fortunately, only 3 days remained, and everything would be over. With the departure date drawing near, Ben found everything in the villa that was related to Amy, discarding some, burning others, clearing everything out. From the various photos of her university speeches and debates that he had collected, to the couple's mugs, slippers, pajamas, and the good luck charm he had obtained for her. Every single item was proof of his love for Amy. The last things to be burned were the love letters he had written to her. He threw the letters into the fire, one by one, his thoughts drifting back to the past. Actually, in the beginning, Ben had pursued Amy normally. He had even spent 3 months writing 99 love letters, but the final result of each letter was that she rejected him. Later, when he saw her struggling with medical expenses, he came up with this plan so that she could accept the help and he could fulfill his long-cherished wish. Perhaps he was really wrong. True love can't be bought with money. The novels also said that the female lead, Amy, only loved her male lead, Chris. Thinking of this, Ben had no more attachments and threw the last love letter in his hand into the fire. The door suddenly opened, and Amy happened to be back. She immediately saw the colorful envelope being thrown into the fire. She hadn't read the contents, but she was very familiar with the envelope. It was the love letter he had sent her before, but had all been rejected by her. She felt her heart skip a beat, and the question blurted out before she could even think. "What are you doing?" Ben looked at Amy's stunned face through the blazing fire, feeling a little inexplicably strange. But after a moment, he still answered her question. "Burning things. These things are useless, so I'm burning them." Amy felt a little flustered. She could feel Ben's changes recently, and he was always doing some inexplicable things. She didn't want to argue with him, but when the words came out, she became unforgiving again. "Yes, you've gotten everything you wanted, so these things are naturally useless." Amy had mocked Ben quite a bit before, and every time he would be very sad, but this time he only felt calm in his heart. "It will be over soon." This abrupt sentence made Amy feel that he was a little inexplicable, not knowing what he was up to again. She didn't stay any longer and didn't bother with the things he was burning, going straight upstairs to the study. Ben still sat there motionless, watching the flames burn the last love letter to ashes. The flames, without the support of combustibles, could no longer be arrogant and finally died out in the dust. "Amy, from now on, forget this humiliating memory. Forget me, the villainous supporting male lead. You and I, let's both start a new life." The next morning, when Amy was about to go out, Ben stopped her. "Tomorrow is our 5th anniversary. I booked a cruise. Will you come with me to see the sea and the sunset?" He always did things on a whim, hoping that he wouldn't cause any more trouble this time. Amy thought this way and only gave a cold before going out. Perhaps because he had expectations, Ben felt that the day passed very quickly. Soon it was the appointed day, which was also the day he would fake his death and leave. He specially dressed himself carefully before taking Amy to the cruise he had booked. The scenery on the cruise was very beautiful. The afterglow of the setting sun sprinkled on the sea and the cruise, and the warm orange light shone on him. The sea and the sky reflected each other, forming a beautiful picture. Amy looked at the scene in front of her, and a strange look flashed in her eyes. But the next second, the rare tranquility was interrupted by a burst of urgent ringing. When Ben looked back at her, she was already on the phone talking about work. He knew that she was busy with the project she was working on. In a few hours, her project would go live. After the project went live, it would be a huge success. This was the turning point in her life, and also the turning point in his life. "Amy, if you were rich, what would you do?" When Ben spoke, Amy had already hung up the phone. Hearing his inexplicable question, she only said lightly, "Do what I want to do." When she said this, there was no extra expression on her face, as if she was just saying it casually. But looking at her face that never showed him even a hint of gentleness, he couldn't help but think in his heart, "When you become rich, the first thing you will do is to get rid of me, right? But Amy, this time I won't trouble you to do it." On the deck, the waiters began to serve the dishes in an orderly manner. Before long, the table was filled with exquisite food. The setting sun on the beach was down to its last sliver. Ben and Amy sat across from each other at the dining table. He looked at the exquisite meal, but had no appetite. She looked at him, as economical with her words as ever. Until Amy's phone rang again, breaking the silence between them. The screen lit up, displaying the 2 words Chris. She paused before answering the call. The moment she connected, Chris's voice, filled with sobs, came through the phone, clearly audible to both of them. "Amy, I had a car accident. Can you come to the hospital?" Amy frowned the moment she heard this. She turned to look at Ben. who put down his knife and fork in response. I heard. Do you want to go? She didn't hesitate. Anniversaries can be celebrated any time. Chris needs me now. He didn't speak, just looked at her calmly. Seeing him like this, her heart pounded inexplicably. She had been frighteningly calm since she was a child, and this was the first time she experienced a sense of losing control. So, she added, rarely, I'll make up the anniversary to you next time. After saying that, she picked up her phone and got up. He watched her hurried figure rushing off the cruise ship, not hindering her choice. After a long silence, he murmured, Amy, there won't be a next time for us. Ben watched the sunset alone. The last light of the sun was hidden beneath the sea. The lights on the cruise ship gradually lit up. A staff member boarded the cruise ship and walked straight to his side. Mr. Goo, everything is ready. Hearing the voice, he didn't turn around, still gazing into the distance. How will I die? Accidental fall into the sea. The news will spread in an hour. After that, your body will float at sea for 3 days and 3 nights, and then be found by the police, confirming your death. The staff member told him the details of his death one by one. Ben nodded, having no objection to this. Once everything was arranged, he turned and got off the cruise ship, taking one last look at the city. Then he put on the hat and mask he had prepared, broke his SIM card, and walked towards the airport without looking back. Amy, this time, I'll personally send you to your male lead. And I, this villainous supporting character, will completely log off from your world. Amy returned to the villa 3 days later. A long-lost smile was on her face. Chris's injury was improving. The project she had been busy with was a huge hit after it went live. She could finally enter the upper class on her own, instead of being a poor student who could only sell herself to pay for her grandmother's medical expenses. She had the first payment she received from the project launch in her pocket, ready to give it back to Ben when she saw him later. Once the debt relationship between them was cleared, she could finally stand up straight in front of him. But when Amy pushed open the door, the villa was empty, silent. Ben, who usually waited for her to return in the living room, was nowhere to be seen this time. An unusual emotion flashed through her heart. For some reason, her heart also felt empty. Remembering his unusual behavior during this time, she vaguely felt uneasy again. Was this another way he was planning to torture her? Unsure, she took out her phone to send him a message, but a news notification popped up on the home screen. Recently, the only son of the Ben family, the richest man in City A, has gone missing. Shortly after, a floating corpse was found at sea. After police confirmation, the floating corpse is the Ben family's young master. The cause of death is not yet clear. The short sentence struck Amy like a bolt of lightning. She couldn't believe her eyes. Her hand uncontrollably clicked on the news article. The photos that were released wouldn't be too clear, but she still saw the floating corpse at a glance. Her eyes widened, wanting to find evidence that the floating corpse wasn't Ben. But the more she looked, the more frightened she became. The body's build and clothing were unmistakably identical to Ben's when they had last seen him. He's dead? No, she had to see it with her own eyes. Unless she saw his body, she wouldn't believe he was gone. Amy staggered towards the exit, only a few steps away, but her legs were so weak she nearly fell several times. She had intended to drive to the police station herself, but when she tried to start the car, her hands trembled so much she couldn't even hold the keys. Reluctantly, she had to walk a little further to hail a taxi. The car quickly arrived at the police station. Amy suddenly felt a little timid. She didn't know what she would do if the body really was Ben. Miss, we're here. Aren't you getting out? The driver waited for a while, watching her expression change repeatedly in the rearview mirror. Considering their destination, he assumed she was confessing to a crime and couldn't help but sigh, thinking, what a shame for such a nice girl to end up like this. Amy was unaware of his thoughts. Hearing the driver urge her to leave, she suddenly snapped back to reality, pushed open the door, and got out. After entering the police station and explaining her purpose, a police officer led her to the place where bodies were stored. When she arrived, she discovered she wasn't the first one there. Ben's mother's eyes were swollen red, clearly from crying. Ben's father was much calmer, but his eyes were also somewhat red. Seeing someone approach, they looked up and recognized Amy, their feelings becoming complex. They had read their son's letter and knew that he had only faked his death to leave. However, they still felt resentful towards Amy. If it hadn't been for her, their Ben wouldn't have needed to resort to faking his death. The moment Amy saw them, her heart sank to the bottom. She suddenly couldn't bring herself to take another step forward, nor could she bear to look at the body that was so close. Initially, Ben's parents had made a fuss, but she refused to let go. Each argument ended with her saying, "You can only take the urn over my dead body." Amy moved out of the villa she once shared with Ben. When she was cleaning up, she discovered that everything in the villa that held memories of them had disappeared. Recalling Ben's strange behavior in the last few weeks, although the police had ruled Ben's death as an accidental fall into the sea, she stubbornly believed that his death was not an accident, but premeditated. That's why he refused to be intimate with her, why he wanted to push her towards Chris, and why he cleared away all the memories related to her. In the bedroom, Amy hugged the urn, surrounded by a floor covered in wine bottles, some standing and some fallen. Her eyes were filled with endless sadness and regret, along with a touch of self-mockery. Ben had been so obvious from the very beginning, so why had she been completely oblivious? Another gulp of strong liquor burned as it went down, and the intense pain spread throughout her body. She reached out to caress the patterns on the urn, closed her eyes, and his smiling face suddenly appeared before her. Ben. She was lost in her own world, unable to pull herself out, when the bedroom door was suddenly kicked open with great force. The light streamed into the darkened bedroom, and the blinding light made her squint. She looked up and saw a figure standing in the doorway. The figure, seeing the state of the room, panicked. Stepping carefully between the wine bottles, Chris rushed to her side, trying to take the urn from her arms and help her up. "Sister Amy." The exclamation made her remember who was in front of her, but her body had already instinctively dodged his hand, tightly clutching the urn to her chest. The wariness in her eyes stabbed at Chris's heart, but looking at her haggard face and bloodshot eyes, his voice softened involuntarily. "Amy, you'll end up hurting yourself if you keep going like this. Put the box down first, and let's go to the hospital, okay?" Hearing his voice, her eyes flickered, and she finally looked at Chris directly. Her voice was calm, but he heard a hint of accusation in it. "You knew too, didn't you? Knew that Ben had decided to leave long ago, but kept her in the dark." Chris was stunned by her question, and it took him a long time to realize what she was asking. His expression instantly changed. He looked wronged, with an expression that seemed to say, "How could you think of me that way?" "Amy, I really didn't know anything. Back then, it was Gu himself who approached me, saying he wanted to cooperate with me." "Cooperate? What kind of cooperation?" Amy immediately seized on the key point, her sharp gaze shooting straight at Chris. He had never seen that look in her eyes. He unconsciously loosened his grip on her hand. Finally, under her murderous gaze, he confessed everything that had happened back then. In the end, he didn't forget to beg for mercy. "Amy, I really just loved you too much, but I really didn't target him after that. Amy, your relationship was forced upon you by him in the first place. You don't even like him. Now that he's dead, you're finally free. Shouldn't you be happy?" Before he could finish his sentence, her hand grabbed his neck. "Who told you I didn't like him?" Chris was so frightened that his eyes turned red, and tears instantly filled his eyes. Soon, large teardrops streamed down his cheeks, landing on her hand, scalding her, and causing her hand to stiffen and quickly retract. After a long silence, she turned her back to him, hiding the coldness in her eyes. "Leave. I don't want to see you again." Amy didn't know why seeing him cry made her heart ache along with him, but she knew very well that she didn't love him. Otherwise, she definitely wouldn't have attacked him just now. But just like how she had always lost her mind because of him and had repeatedly ignored Ben for his sake, just like how she didn't actually always have to be at odds with Ben, but the words she spoke would unconsciously change their meaning. She couldn't see her own heart clearly, and she couldn't control her words and actions. Until Ben died, the gauze that had been covering her heart was lifted, and she finally saw her heart clearly, but she found it even harder to understand her past actions. At that moment, a sense of false absurdity spread through her heart. 5 years later, a quiet bar on the outskirts of a prosperous city in Country C. when Ben's parents sent another large sum of money. Worried that their son would have a hard time living alone in a foreign country, Leo finally couldn't help but make a phone call to them. "Mom and Dad, how many times have I told you I'm doing fine here? You don't have to worry about me, and you don't have to transfer money to me so often." Ben was very helpless. 5 years ago, he changed his name to Leo and came here. His parents were worried that he wouldn't have a good life here alone, so the thing they had done the most over the years was to transfer money to him. He used that money to open a bar near the school. The clientele was stable. Every year a batch would leave, and then another batch would come. Over the years, he had actually lived a very comfortable life. But as they transferred money to him more and more often, Leo felt a faint unease in his heart. Although he had been in country C all these years, he had not given up on paying attention to news from home. Therefore, he also knew clearly what had happened in the country in the past 5 years. Amy's grandmother had passed away the day before Amy became a rising star in the A-city business world. Leo regretted not being able to see the old lady one last time, but compared to seeing Amy's grandmother one last time, he valued his life a little more. Amy was indeed excellent, just as the original story described. It was also because of this that he had been trying to reduce contact with Ben's parents for the past 5 years. He worried that close contact would make her notice something amiss. If everything returned to its original state, then his efforts of the past 5 years would have been in vain. But he didn't know why. According to the original plot, she should have already confessed her feelings to Chris and confirmed their relationship. However, in reality, she had been single for a full 5 years. He heard that she kept his ashes with her every day. Unknowing people always praised her for her deep affection, but Leo always felt that she kept the urn for some other purpose. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but shiver, secretly resolving to reduce contact with China in the future. Suddenly, the sound of someone knocking on the bar came from behind him. He subconsciously turned around and met a pair of deep eyes. "Bartender, a margarita, please." A long-lost and familiar voice, coupled with the features he had spent thousands of days and nights with, so familiar that he could trace them with his eyes closed, made Leo's heart skip a beat, leaving him stunned in place for a moment. "Bartender?" Amy raised her eyebrows, raising her voice to call out again. Leo hurriedly hung up the phone call he was on, feeling a pang of annoyance in his heart. He knew it. With more contact with China, with her intelligence, she would eventually discover that he wasn't dead. He just hadn't expected her to come so quickly, catching him so off guard. Leo forced himself to appear calm, pointed to the closed sign hanging on the clear partition, deliberately lowered his voice, and then spoke. "Closed today. Not open for business." Amy chuckled, picked up the sign, and showed him the side facing upwards, revealing the words "Open for Business" on the front, her eyes full of interest. "If I'm not mistaken, the closed sign is supposed to be for the customers to see, isn't it?" Leo was taken aback. His gaze followed her hand to the sign he was holding, and he realized that he had forgotten to flip the sign over. A look of embarrassment appeared on his face. He then reached out and snatched the sign, hanging it back up with the closed side facing outwards. "Now it's right. Miss, Jing Say is closed today. If you want a drink, maybe you should try another place." After giving her the eviction order, he lowered his head and busied himself, but the woman in front of the bar still stood there, refusing to leave. Just as he was hesitating whether to speak again, Amy spoke first. "Bartender, haven't we met somewhere before?" Leo's body stiffened abruptly, and the cleaning stopped. He felt like he could hear his heart pounding so loudly he could feel it. She had already seen his face. The reason she hadn't come to a conclusion yet was probably because she had indeed seen the body belonging to Ben, so she wasn't quite sure at this moment whether he was really Ben or just a stranger who looked alike. If that was the case, he had to remain calm in order to avoid deepening her suspicions. Thinking of this, Leo remained silent for a long time before finally chuckling without looking up. "Miss, has anyone ever told you that your pickup line is really cheesy?" "No, I haven't hit on anyone before." Amy's answer was without any hesitation, as if she was eager to prove something. He was only focused on how to get her out of there as quickly as possible and didn't hear the meaning in her words. He just kept urging her to leave. Helpless, she had to take a step back first. Then, "Bartender, will you be open tomorrow?" Seeing that she was no longer pressing him, Leo quietly breathed a sigh of relief. After hesitating for a moment, he feared that dodging too obviously would make her suspicious. But if he didn't, with such similar faces, and she had tracked him down here, she would definitely become suspicious. After thinking it over for a moment, he chose a more moderate answer. It depends on my mood. Students are on vacation recently, and there aren't many customers at Jingsa, so I might not open. It was clearly a polite rejection, but to Amy's ears, it sounded like an implication. She continued to speak on her own. Does the owner mean that if there are many customers, you will open? Hearing her words, Leo, who had been holding back for a long time, couldn't resist any longer. He glanced up at her, then quickly lowered his head. If you really want a drink, madam, there are many quiet bars and bars nearby. There might be some elsewhere. You don't have to stick around Jingsa. What had happened in these 5 years? Why had Amy become so clingy? He hid the surprise in his heart and didn't dare ask too much. She, however, just stood there, waiting for his answer until he nodded helplessly. Only then did she leave with a smiling face. Leo really didn't understand what she was suddenly doing this for. Seeing her figure disappear, he took out his phone again and called Ben's parents. They quickly answered the phone. Ben, what's wrong? Is there something the matter? Amy found me here. Mom and Dad, what exactly happened in these years? Why do I feel like she's changed a lot? Leo rubbed his temples, feeling a headache facing the situation. Ben's parents were silent for a moment, then hesitantly asked him the reason why he suddenly said he wanted to fake his death back then. After 5 years, his parents asked again. After thinking about it, he still didn't hide anything and told the story of awakening as a dream. Initially, Ben's parents disagreed with them being together, not because Amy was poor, nor because they felt she was not good enough for him. It was just that at that time, they only had one thought about Amy. She didn't love Ben, and Ben's insistence would inevitably suffer in the end. But he was their carefully nurtured son, and how could they bear to see him suffer, even after knowing the ending? But he was too stubborn at that time, determined to not let go of Amy, refusing to give up until he ran into a brick wall. Later, he really did run into a brick wall and realized his parents were right. Now, their attitude had changed again. Ben, over the years, we have watched her step by step to where she is today. We can feel that she likes you. If it's just a dream, why don't you come back? As Ben's mother finished speaking, Ben's father's voice followed closely. That's right, Ben. And didn't you say that she found you? It's been 5 years. Come back, and we'll help you get through this tribulation, okay? Leo ultimately didn't agree directly. Male support awakening sounded too absurd, and it was within his expectations that Ben's parents didn't believe him. As for Amy loving him, he didn't believe it. They had been together for 6 whole years. If he had felt even a trace of love from Amy, perhaps he wouldn't have chosen to fake his death to escape. And now, she hadn't been with her destined male lead, but had chosen to guard his ashes all along, and they said she loved him. But who knew if she was just deviating from her trajectory because of his fake death and would one day return to her proper course? That night, Leo tossed and turned, unable to sleep all night. When dawn broke, he finally fell asleep drowsily. When he woke up again, it was already afternoon. He didn't know why, but he slept particularly well this time. So well that his memory was like it had just awakened from a dream and was completely chaotic, making it hard for him to tell what year it was. He sat on the bed in a daze for a long time before his memories finally returned. He hurriedly got up and rushed to the Ching bar, where Amy was indeed waiting outside. But she wasn't the only one outside the door. There were also some familiar customers from the past. Logically, after he said a few days ago that he might not be open for business these days, they shouldn't have come. Even if people came, there would only be a few scattered ones. But at this moment, not only did they come, but they came in full force, gathered in large and small groups around her. Without guessing, Leo knew that Amy must have called them. Amy saw Leo walking towards her at a glance, and a smile finally appeared on her gloomy face. She stepped forward, her tone quite meaningful. "Boss, you really did come after all." The moment Leo saw Amy, he suddenly froze. The memories he had just sorted out became chaotic again. A trace of confusion flashed in his eyes, but in the next second, he returned to normal. After greeting the other customers one by one, he took out the key to open the door. As he pushed the door open and walked inside, he saw her immediately follow him, and a burst of inexplicable irritability arose in his heart. He had already chosen to leave, making room for her and her childhood sweetheart. Why didn't she stay in the country and be with Chris, but instead came to him? The store quickly became lively. While Leo was making drinks for the customers, he felt somewhat inexplicable about his recent behavior and emotions. It was strange. Ever since Amy appeared, his memory seemed to be getting confused. For a moment, he even felt like he wasn't himself anymore. Fortunately, that feeling didn't last long, but in the end, Leo still identified the source of these changes. Amy. She sat down at the bar and ordered the same margarita as yesterday. The margarita wasn't difficult to make. Soon, he placed a mixed drink in front of her. "Miss, your drink." She took the glass but didn't drink it. She just stared straight at him and suddenly said, "My name is Amy." "Okay, Miss Lynn." Leo's expression was as usual, as if he really didn't know her. He just nodded. His reaction made her gradually lose patience. Amy had investigated him before coming to Country C. She had noticed something wrong with the Ben family a month ago. Except for when she first saw the bodies, she didn't see any parental grief on their faces. At first, she thought they were just hiding their grief in their hearts, until she discovered that Ben's family's funds have been transferring overseas for the past 5 years. After investigating, she discovered that Ben's family seemed to be hiding a big secret. Leo Ben. The same face, the same figure, about the same age. One disappeared, and then the other suddenly appeared. If there was only one similarity, it could be considered a coincidence, but too many similarities put together left only the most impossible answer. She spoke, her voice filled with certainty. "Ben, how long do you want to keep hiding?" Leo looked up at her, his eyes filled with incomprehension. "Miss Lynn, are you mistaken?" "My name is Leo. Of course, you can also call me Bruce." He was determined to deny that he was Ben. What did she do to him? Anyway, Ben's identity had really been canceled 5 years ago. Now, only Leo existed in this world. Amy didn't expect him to react this way, and she laughed in anger. "Leo, an orphan with no parents, you came to Country C 5 years ago to seek refuge with relatives. However, in these past 5 years, although there's a senior who's been relatively close, he's not from Country C and hasn't even been there. In other words, no one has ever seen this so-called relative of yours. And in recent years, you've been in close contact with the Ben family, the richest family in City A, with a large sum of money being deposited into an account under your name every 6 months. Mr. Leo, can you explain these things?" Hearing her statement after statement, Leo couldn't help but swallow. How could she have investigated so thoroughly? She probably wasn't this dedicated to him, even when they were together, was she? Now that he had changed his identity and faked his death to leave, she had investigated his new identity in such detail. Leo was infuriated, and his gaze towards her became somewhat impolite. "Miss, I have no grudges or animosity with you. We're not related. Why are you investigating me? Why I came to Country C and who I associate with doesn't seem to concern you, does it?" Amy was choked by his words and was momentarily speechless. After a pause, she thought of another reason. "I once received a favor from the Ben family. Your actions are so suspicious, and you took such a large sum of money from the Ben family. I have the right to suspect that you have ill intentions." She thought this would make him open up, but he only glanced at her suspiciously and then blocked her words again. "Even if I have ill intentions, it should be the Ben family who comes to trouble me. It doesn't seem to be your place to interfere, does it? And what is your position to question me? A friend of Aunt Goo and Uncle Goo, or the kept woman of their deceased son?" The words "kept woman" instantly stung Amy's heart, causing her eyes to redden suddenly. She pursed her lips and finally gave him a deep look before turning around and leaving without a word. Her entire being exuded an aura of low pressure. For some reason, Leo could read a sense of loneliness from her back. He opened his mouth, realizing that his words were a bit harsh, but in the end, he didn't call out to her. Anyway, throughout the 5 years they were together, wasn't that what Amy had always thought? She provided the money, and he sold himself. She had said those words countless times herself, so why put on this pitiful appearance to seek his sympathy now? But Leo also knew that since Amy had found him, she would never give up because of this one setback. It seemed that if he wanted peace, he would have to move. It was just a pity about this bar, which had accompanied him for 5 years, but was now disrupted by Amy's arrival. He got up and walked to the door. To prevent Amy from still stubbornly waiting outside, he didn't plan to go home, but locked the door of the bar and then slowly went upstairs. Lying on the bed, Leo still didn't understand why Amy was doing all this. Just to get revenge for him buying her in the beginning? But didn't he give her compensation later? And this matter was originally something she had agreed to, a win-win situation. Even if she hated him, the matter should have been written off when he faked his death. Why did she have to pursue him so relentlessly? He couldn't figure it out, so he simply stopped thinking about it and fell into a deep sleep. Outside the bar, Amy, as he expected, had not left. The car was not started. She sat in the driver's seat, looking at the steering wheel with bitterness in her heart. Kept woman. In his heart, was she really just a kept woman? The transfer information for Jingxi was sent out the next day. Leo didn't leave a single tool from the bar. Coincidentally, the next owner also planned to open a bar, so he gave them all to the next owner. The speed was so fast that Amy couldn't help but be amazed. She didn't even see when he left. But also because of this, she became even more certain of what she thought in her heart. Leo was Ben. He had originally planned to leave country C for another, but he didn't expect to be stopped at the airport by Amy. If you're not Ben, why are you hiding? Even now, Amy still didn't understand why Ben had suddenly faked his death and left. Faced with her question, a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. Hiding? Why was he hiding? What was he hiding from? His mind became a mess. His memories seemed to be shuffling and rearranging themselves. In a matter of moments, he was covered in sweat, his lips pale. Amy was startled by the sudden change, her heart pounding. Seeing his legs buckle, she quickly supported him, ready to take him to the hospital. Ben, don't be afraid. I'll take you to the hospital. As soon as she spoke, his breathing became much smoother. He shook his head at her. I want to go home. Seeing that he had recovered, Amy finally breathed a sigh of relief. But hearing him say he wanted to go home, she was at a loss again, unsure which home he was referring to. Leo saw her confusion and sighed, then went to the ticket window and bought the soonest flight back to China. Seeing this, Amy bought one too. Why did you come looking for me? Once on the plane back to China, Leo finally gave up hiding his identity. He probably realized that Amy had long since recognized him. Besides that, there was an even more important reason, which was also why he had suddenly decided to return to China. From the day Amy reappeared, his memories had been secretly tampered with. He was afraid that, in the end, he would really forget that his real name was Ben. He feared he would forget everything from the past, forget his parents. Amy looked at him, not answering his question, but instead asking the question that had been troubling her ever since she found out he wasn't dead. Why did you choose to leave that way back then? I asked first. You answer first. Leo rubbed his temples. Under her persistent questioning, he felt a throbbing headache beginning again. After a long silence, Amy finally gave in and spoke first. I don't know. I just wanted to see you again. I wanted to see if you were happier without me, which is why you suddenly didn't want me anymore. Because I can't bear a life without you. His confession was hidden beneath the silence, and in the end, only 4 words could be uttered. Amy was stunned. For some reason, that feeling of being controlled swept over her again. She opened her mouth, but couldn't say another word. The sound of other passengers chatting softly reached Leo's ears, assuring him that his hearing was fine. But even though Amy's lips were opening and closing in front of him, he couldn't hear anything. In that instant, Leo suddenly remembered his tampered memories. A flash of inspiration went through his mind, and he understood the real reason for all of this. The novel world was real. They had to follow their predetermined paths. The male supporting character Ben's ending was death. So when he left under the alias Leo, nothing happened to him. But Ben was already dead. So when Amy found him and wanted him to admit he was Ben, his memories became disordered. He would gradually forget who he was supposed to be and truly believe himself to be Leo. The female lead, Amy, was destined to be with the male lead. Therefore, he couldn't fall in love with anyone else, nor could he be loved by anyone else. Even if he did fall in love, it would be forcibly corrected. So, he could return to China, but there would never be any outcome between them. Because in Amy's world, Ben could only be someone who had already died long ago. When the plane landed, Leo didn't stop or look back at Amy standing there. Amy wanted to chase after him, but her legs felt like they were filled with lead, rooted to the spot, unable to move. She could only watch his back grow further and further away, finally disappearing into the bustling crowd. It wasn't until Chris, dressed in a white shirt, appeared at the airport and waved to her, "Amy, I'm here to pick you up. Did you bring me a gift from your business trip this time?" The moment Amy saw Chris, who had been avoiding her for so long, suddenly appear, she felt a strange unease in her heart. Hearing him define her trip abroad as a business trip and expertly ask her for a gift only intensified that feeling. This Chris, it seemed, hadn't appeared since 5 years ago, after she discovered he had once framed Ben and told him to get lost. Like a broken circle, inexplicably returning to its original form without any repair. She didn't know what was happening, but at this moment, she only had one thought. She didn't want to be a puppet controlled by others. Her legs, which had just been restricted, gradually loosened as Chris approached. She stepped forward towards him, but a hint of coldness flickered in her eyes. She seemed to understand why Ben had suddenly left back then, and now, she thought, she might also have to make some attempts. Chris's chattering voice still surrounded her ears, making her head ache. Suddenly, she stopped and looked at him, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Shut up. Can you be quiet? It's so noisy." Abruptly scolded, Chris paused, a hint of grievance appearing on his face, but his words still carried a tone of concern. "Amy, what's wrong? Are you too tired? Then let's go home quickly." He tried to take her hand, but she shook him off. He tried to talk to her, but she ignored him. Leaving the airport, the driver who had been waiting outside opened the car door for her. As soon as she got into the car, she closed her eyes tightly, ignoring Chris, who was about to strike up a conversation. She didn't see his grievance, nor did she notice the hint of resentment hidden beneath it. It's all Ben's fault, not letting anyone rest in peace even after death. Ever since Ben's death, Amy had always been indifferent to him like this. But before that, she never resisted his approach. Before that, he could feel that she wasn't completely without feelings for him. He really thought Ben was helping him, but he never expected Ben to have such a plan, wanted to make sure everyone was miserable. But after Chris' resentment, he felt a sense of helplessness. He hated Ben, but so what? Ben was already dead, and he had become Amy's untouchable white moonlight, and Chris couldn't even do anything to him. But soon, he discovered that he was wrong. The car stopped in front of Amy's villa, but she didn't go home. Instead, she walked straight in the other direction. Chris was stunned and quickly got out of the car to follow her. "Amy, where are you going?" Amy, walking ahead, didn't wait for him or answer his question. Chris could only follow closely behind her. But as they walked, he noticed something was wrong. The direction she was going was towards the Ben family. But ever since Ben's death, Amy's relationship with the Ben family had deteriorated rapidly, and she hadn't been to the Ben family since. She had just returned from a business trip today, so why would she suddenly think of going to the Ben family? Although Amy's villa and the Ben family were in opposite directions, the distance wasn't too far, so the two of them didn't walk for too long before arriving at the Ben family's villa. Inside the living room, Leo had already arrived home. Ben's parents were gathered around him, asking about his experiences in Country C over the past 5 years. Leo patiently answered. The doorbell rang at that moment. He turned back, a hint of puzzlement in his eyes. The maid went to open the door, hesitating for a moment upon seeing who was outside. However, Amy disregarded everything and barged in. The living room door was abruptly opened. Leo instinctively turned his head, his eyes meeting Amy's and Chris's. "You're not dead." The instant Chris saw Leo's face, he couldn't contain the shock in his heart and exclaimed. But immediately afterward, a surge of anger welled up within him. So that was his true plan all along? First, suggest bringing him and Amy together to stabilize him. Then feign his death to consolidate his position in Amy's heart, and finally return at the right moment, so that he could completely steal Amy away. Chris looked at him, the resentment in his eyes almost impossible to hide. His direct gaze naturally attracted the attention of Ben's parents, causing them to frown. The maid, who had rushed over, panting, saw the five people already facing each other in the living room and apologized repeatedly. "Master, madam, they just barged in. We really couldn't stop them." Madam Ben waved her hand, signaling the maid to leave. She finally breathed a sigh of relief and quickly exited the living room. The moment the door closed, Leo looked at them, his tone displeased. "Miss Lin and Mr. Jiang are making quite a show. I wonder what business you two have forcing your way into a private residence." Amy knew her behavior was impolite, but she also knew that if she waited for the maid to announce her, she might not be able to see Ben. She could only apologize to him first. "I'm sorry, Ben, but I just want to talk to you. I don't mean anything else." After explaining her own matter, she remembered Chris, who had followed her in, and she couldn't help but rub her temples in irritation. She hadn't really felt it before, but how did Chris become like a piece of gum that couldn't be shaken off, following her wherever she went? She turned her head to look at him, a hint of impatience flashing in her eyes. "Why are you following me all the time? Don't you have anything else to do?" Once again, she excluded him completely. Chris began to feel wronged again. He disliked her too much. He was too afraid of losing her. But why was she unwilling to even let him follow? They had been childhood sweethearts for many years. Hadn't she always favored him before? But to prevent Amy from disliking him even more, Chris ultimately left the living room first. But he didn't leave the Ben family's villa. He wandered aimlessly near the entrance, thinking of waiting for them to finish talking so he could see her as soon as possible. Inside the living room, Ben's parents exchanged glances and then turned to look at Leo and Amy, who were standing opposite each other in a stalemate. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Ben's father coughed lightly, breaking the atmosphere that was about to completely freeze. "We have something to do, so we'll go upstairs first. You two young people should sit down and have a good talk about whatever problems you have. Don't always quarrel and throw tantrums." After saying that, he didn't wait for their response and directly got up and went upstairs. The huge living room was suddenly left with only two people. After a long silence, Amy finally spoke, but she was immediately interrupted by Leo. "Just say what you have to say. You were the one I bought in the first place, and you've always been cold to me. Now that the contract is over and we've broken up, it doesn't seem like our relationship has reached the point where we can address each other like that. Moreover, Ben is already dead. The one who's alive now is only Leo, the Ben family's adopted son." Before she could finish speaking, she was interrupted by Leo. "You like me, and then what?" Having failed to correct the form of address, Leo eventually chose to skip the topic, directly continuing with what she had said. Amy was taken aback, not understanding the meaning of his question, while he simply maintained a cold face, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Ben, who is entangled with Amy, will only have one ending, and that is death. Amy, I don't believe you haven't noticed anything unusual." The events on the plane were vivid in his mind, but Leo believed that even if he didn't know about the part of his memory that had awakened, even if he still hadn't realized that the time he almost fainted was due to her and his memory disorder, and the time he lost his voice was enough to make him understand that there was definitely something wrong with this world. Amy recalled the feeling of control that she had once sensed, which could be called blatant. She moved her lips, but found herself speechless. She had indeed noticed it, but she was unwilling to accept her fate. She had someone she liked, and didn't want to be manipulated into embarking on another journey without him. "Ben," she had just uttered the first syllable when she remembered what Leo had said. "Ben, who is entangled with Amy, will only end up dead." She then forced herself to change the form of address, looking at him with a determined gaze. "Leo, wait for me. I will reach you without any obstacles. When that day comes, no one will be able to stop us anymore." Leo stared at her as she declared her ambitious aspirations, stunned and speechless for a moment. No one will be able to stop them. Will that day really come? Without being controlled by the plot, without having his memory erased, without having to helplessly watch him fall in love with someone else? Leo had once thought he had accepted this ending, but until Amy spoke these words, a sliver of hope uncontrollably rose from the bottom of his heart. He watched her turn and walk away after saying this, and finally lowered his head with a sense of melancholy. "But Amy, I have waited for you for a long, long time, but I still can't be sure. Do you really love me? Or are you just mistaking obsession for love?" Otherwise, why have I never felt your affection for me? He muttered to himself. Ben's father and mother, who were upstairs, heard that there was no more noise downstairs and quietly poked their heads out, looking at their son's lost and lonely figure, unable to help but feel heartbroken. The two hurriedly went downstairs and walked to Leo's side, gently comforting him. "What's wrong, Ben? Did you quarrel with her?" Leo, who was originally just feeling a little down, instantly lost control of his emotions upon hearing Ben's mother's gentle voice. He buried his head in Ben's mother's arms and burst into tears. Ben's father and mother didn't know what had happened either. They wanted to comfort him, but didn't know where to start. They could only exchange a flustered glance, and when they saw the bewilderment in each other's eyes, they helplessly looked away, comforting him in a cautious and gentle tone, waiting for him to calm down on his own. A few minutes later, Leo, having cried enough, wiped his tears and remained nestled in Ben's mother's arms, only raising his head with a downturned mouth and a few streaks of dried tears on his cheeks. "Dad, Mom, what do you think? What if the dream I had was real?" Only then did Ben's father and mother understand that he was still uneasy because of that dream. They couldn't help but find it a little funny that he had faked his death because of a dream and lived alone abroad for 5 years, which was already quite unbelievable. Now that he was finally willing to come back, he was still so hung up on that dream. However, when their gaze met Leo's aggrieved look, they quickly straightened their expressions. "Don't be afraid, Ben. No matter what happens, Dad and Mom will be with you to get through it. She shouldn't have seen anything, right?" Thinking this, her gaze darkened, and she scanned back and forth between him and the garage, squinting her eyes and asking, "Where did you go?" "What could I do? I just felt a little bored, so I walked around." He felt guilty and shook his head, waving his hands, forcing a smile as he denied it. After explaining, he quickly changed the subject, finding a random excuse. "Amy, have you finished talking with Ben? It's getting late. We should head back too." Mentioning Ben, Chris hesitated again. He had seen Ben's corpse back then, although it was somewhat unrecognizable after being soaked in the sea for 3 days and nights. That was precisely why he had a deep impression of that face. It was definitely Ben. But if that corpse was Ben, then who was the person he just saw in the villa? Could it really be something ghostly, like a ridiculous resurrection from the dead? Amy wasn't Ben 5 years ago. Then who was that just now? Amy only glanced at him before striding towards the villa exit. Only when he caught up did she turn her head warningly. "He's not Ben. He's the Ben family's adopted son, named Leo. Chris, you better keep your little schemes in check. If anything happens to him because of you, don't think the Ben family will let you off, and neither will I. Chris, you know I'm capable of it." Chris quickly shook his head, a flattering smile on his face. "Amy, how could I do such things?" Amy didn't say she believed him, nor did she say she didn't. She just continued walking forward, and he almost couldn't keep up with her pace, but a hint of triumph welled up in his heart. Adopted son Leo? If he was still a little unsure before, at this moment, he was completely certain of his guess. Name, appearance, and the fact that he's also a son of the Ben family. Who would believe there's no trickery involved? How could there be such a coincidence in this world? Although he didn't know what methods Ben used back then, it was undeniable that he had used means to fake his death and leave 5 years ago. Now, he's just changed his name and returned to his city. If he had already decided to fake his death and leave, why would he come back now? Wouldn't it have been better to just die? Why did he have to come back and compete with him for Amy? But whether he was Ben or it was all just a coincidence, Chris could never let him return to Amy's side. He died, and Amy might be sad for a while, but time would smooth over all wounds. When she only had him by her side, she would eventually fall in love with him. He looked back at the direction of the Ben family villa, a rather pleased smile curving his lips. "So Ben, go die. As long as you die, it will all be over. Ben family villa." Leo refused to use Ben's identity again, no matter what. Ben's parents had no choice but to compromise. "If you don't want to, then so be it, Ben. In that case, we'll hold a banquet in a while to officially establish your identity as our adopted son. That way, it'll be easier for you to get around." Leo didn't refuse the suggestion and nodded. After all, he couldn't just stay cooped up in the villa after returning to the country. He needed an identity that would allow him to operate out in the open. Amy hadn't seen Leo since that day. She was looking for a way to break free from control, and soon after, news came that the Bin family was holding a welcome banquet for their newly recognized adopted son. When she received the invitation sent by the Bin's parents, she only hesitated for a moment before accepting it. She wanted to see Leo, even if it was just from afar. The welcome banquet was held at a city's largest hotel. Almost every wealthy family received an invitation, but no one had ever heard of this sudden appearance of the Bin family's adopted son. Just judging by the scale of the event, it was clear that the Bin family valued this adopted son very much. This couldn't help but pique everyone's curiosity. They all wanted to see what kind of background and abilities this adopted son, who had caused the long silent Bin family to suddenly make such a big move, possessed. On the day of the welcome banquet, the guests arrived at the hotel early, waiting for the protagonist of the day to appear. The venue had also been meticulously arranged, but the host family was conspicuously absent. At the banquet, people gathered in small groups of 2s and 3s, toasting and complaining about Ben's father and Ben's mother. What's going on with the Ben family today? They called us all here, saying they're going to introduce their newly adopted son, but we've been here for so long, and they still haven't arrived? Exactly. Usually, the host family arrives first for banquets. Old Ben isn't hosting for the first time. How could he make such a mistake? In a corner, Amy listened to the discussions and felt her eyelids suddenly twitch violently. A sense of unease flashed through her mind. Ben's father and Ben's mother and Leo had not appeared. This situation was too abnormal, and she had a vague suspicion. Some of those with closer ties to the Ben family finally noticed something was wrong. Something's not right. They haven't shown up after all this time. Could something have happened? Should we contact them and ask what's going on? Yes, let's contact them first. One of them took out his phone, ready to find Ben's father's number, when a news alert popped up on the screen. A major car accident occurred on Chunchi Road at noon today. 2 men and 1 woman in the car were seriously injured and have been taken to the hospital for emergency treatment. After accident investigation, it was determined to be caused by brake failure. Chunchi Road? Isn't that the only way from the Ben family villa to the hotel? Plus the information about 2 men and 1 woman. It was practically screaming that the people in the accident were the Ben family trio, who were late to arrive. Amy stood up abruptly, her rationality instantly gone. She walked out of the hotel while taking out her phone to dial a number. Help me find out which hospital the 3 people involved in the car accident this afternoon were taken to. When the address was sent, Amy had just gotten into her car. She glanced at it and, without hesitation, started the car and sped towards the address her assistant had sent. 10 minutes later, at a City First hospital, Amy casually inquired and learned the Ben family's room numbers, then went directly upstairs. The 3 had just finished surgery and were still unconscious, but thankfully, their lives were not in danger. Only after hearing that their lives were not in danger did Amy breathe a sigh of relief. Only then was she able to finally take time to consider the cause of the accident. A wealthy family, like the Ben family, would have their cars maintained regularly. There was no possibility of natural brake failure. A sudden brake failure could only be man-made. And when it came to man-made causes, Chris, whom she saw coming from the garage when she went to find Leo that day, couldn't help flashing into Amy's mind. Instantly, a wave of remorse surged from the bottom of her heart. That's right, Chris had harbored malice towards Leo for 5 years. Now that he was back, how could he really stay outside and do nothing? Chris's guilt was so obvious then. How could she not have noticed? If she had been more careful and reminded Leo earlier, would they not have suffered this misfortune? After remorse came uncontrollable anger. She had warned Chris that day, saying that if Leo was harmed because of him, not only would the Ben family not let him go, but neither would she. And now, he had treated her words as a passing breeze, causing all 3 members of the Ben family to have an accident and end up in the hospital. Chris, well done. After lying in the hospital for a full week, Ben's father and Ben's mother and Leo finally woke up one after the other. Seeing the caregiver beside him, Leo subconsciously tried to sit up, but was stopped and soothed by the caregiver in time. I am the caregiver hired by Director Amy. Your parents are in the next room, and Director Amy has also hired caregivers to take care of them. Please rest assured. You've only just woken up, and your injuries haven't fully healed, so be careful not to move around too much. His mind was still a bit hazy, a complete mess. Hearing the caregiver's words, he obediently lay back down. Seeing that he wasn't moving around anymore, the caregiver took out her phone and dialed Amy's number. Director Amy, Mr. Leo is awake. In the small, dark storage room of the Sief family villa, the only window that allowed light in had been sealed off, and all the items that had been stored there had been cleared out to ensure that Chris, who was locked in the storage room, couldn't use any tools to escape. Chris, who was being closely guarded, had his hands tied and a rag stuffed in his mouth. His lips were covered in dry, cracked skin, and he was so hungry he was delirious. He was thrown into a corner, a pathetic mess, and could only helplessly look at Amy and whimper, begging for mercy with his last bit of strength. She hung up the phone and, after hearing the caregiver's words, turned her gaze to Chris. A long-lost smile appeared on her lips. Chris, you should really be grateful that Jing and Uncle Ben and Aunt Ben have woken up. After she finished speaking, she turned and walked out of the storage room, watching the servant lock the door before leaving for the hospital with peace of mind. In the storage room, the last ray of light disappeared into the darkness as the door was locked. Chris's face was covered in tears, a mixture of fear and resentment. He had grown up with Amy since childhood and was the only person besides Amy's grandmother who had been accepted as one of her own. He had always thought that he was the most special person in her heart, but later, in order to save Amy's grandmother, she became Ben's girlfriend. Although she cared about him the most between her and Ben, he was still insanely jealous. Why had he been with Amy for so many years without being able to become her boyfriend, while Ben had easily occupied that position by her side for 5 whole years? So, he repeatedly tried to frame Ben, wanting her to completely despise Ben. Everything was developing as he imagined, but Ben died at this time. Ben became the untouchable white moonlight in her heart, and he was completely despised by her just because he had targeted Ben before. Although he still remained by her side, most of the time, she simply treated him like air. He waited another 5 whole years, thinking that he could finally get his wish, but Ben actually came back. He wanted Ben to die, wanted the Ben family to go to hell with Ben, but his actions were discovered by Amy. He had been locked in this dark storage room for a whole week, without seeing the light of day, tortured by her every day, and even eating and drinking water had become a luxury. He had fallen to this point, but Ben and the others were still alive and well. Chris's chest was filled with grief and hatred with nowhere to vent. He clenched his teeth so hard that the metallic taste of rust soon filled his mouth, but he was not very conscious. The extreme thirst made him think only of how thirsty he was the moment he tasted blood. He raised his bound hands and bit down hard on his wrist. Meanwhile, Amy was driving to the hospital when a sudden pain shot through her head. Her grip on the steering wheel loosened, and the steering wheel suddenly went out of control, crashing straight into a tree outside the road. Loud honking blasted in her ears, and her head slammed into the steering wheel with the force of the impact. Screams, the sound of shattering glass, and in her blurry consciousness, she seemed to hear something dripping onto the ground. Was she going to die? Alarm! Alarm! The male and female leads are in mortal danger. Their vital signs are weak. The world is about to collapse. Male and female leads? What does that mean? Who is speaking in her ear again? Is this a hallucination before her death? Amy didn't have time to think before falling completely into unconsciousness. When she woke up again, she found herself in a strange space. Countless lines of code floated in the air. She reached out to touch them, but her hand passed right through the string of data. A ball of light slowly floated in front of her, scanned her, and then red exclamation points appeared in front of those code strings. Data anomaly needs cleaning. Cleaning initiated. The voice of the light ball was devoid of emotion, simply executing commands mechanically. As the voice fell, Amy felt the stinging sensation attack her again. Immediately afterward, she realized that her memories seemed to be forcibly erased by an invisible force. To her horror, she began to forget her memories with Ben. Panic spread through Amy's heart. She wanted to escape, but she was powerless. She wanted to resist, but she couldn't even touch the light ball. And what terrified her even more were the light ball's next words. The male and female lead's emotions are abnormal. need cleaning and rewriting. The female lead has developed feelings for the male second, need cleaning and rewriting. The female lead harbors murderous intent towards the male lead, need cleaning and rewriting. In the light ball's repeated announcements, Amy suddenly realized something. She raised her head and stared intently at the light ball, her voice gritted and deliberate. You are the things controlling me? I'm the female lead? Murderous intent towards the male lead. Could the male lead be Chris? Then the male second is Ben. The light ball's voice paused for a moment after hearing her question, before speaking again after a short silence. This system is only responsible for maintaining the normal operation of this world, and is not responsible for answering this question. It was this pause and refusal to answer from the light ball that confirmed Amy's guess. A sense of absurdity arose in her heart. Anyone who knew that the world they lived in was actually a controlled world would find it unacceptable. But at this moment, Amy suddenly remembered the words she had heard before she fell unconscious. The male and female leads are in mortal danger. Their vital signs are weak. The world is about to collapse. So, it wasn't a hallucination. It was that she and Chris were both in mortal danger, and the world was about to collapse, so they pulled her into this space for inspection. Thinking of this, Amy's eyes flickered slightly. She had thought that Ben's faking his death once would allow him to escape control, and she only needed to imitate him once, changing her identity to become uncontrolled. But she hadn't found a chance to try yet, and now a chance to completely break free from control was presented to her. Since the death of the male and female leads would cause the world to collapse, and this thing that called itself a system only cared about the normal operation of the world, then she had room for negotiation. Let me go. I don't want to be your so-called female lead. I just want to be with Ben. Amy breathed rapidly, afraid that the system would react and continue to cleanse her memory. If she really forgot Ben and became a puppet living under someone else's control, she would rather die. The system's light flickered, seemingly not understanding what she was saying. She then heard her speak again. You can cleanse my memory, but you can't erase my love for Ben. Even if I forget these things now, one day after I leave, I will eventually remember. The person I truly love is not the bullshit male lead you set up. If you force me to follow the plot, then I will kill myself. Isn't being the female lead good? You can have enviable opportunities and endless wealth. A male lead who centers his world around you. If you want, you can become the most powerful person in this world. Its voice softened, carrying a tone of admonition, hoping that this human would understand its implications. As long as she accepted having her memories clearly rewritten, returning to the track that originally belonged to her, she would have everything she wanted, except for the love she desired, the love with the second male lead. It was a pity that Amy was completely unlured by it. She stubbornly shook her head, her eyes firm. I don't want anything. I just want to be with my Ben. Even if you lose everything you had before, you won't regret it. The system didn't understand human emotions. It only knew that, in its opinion, this choice was not a beneficial one. But she nodded. No regrets. But Ben is destined to die. The meaning of his existence is to complete his entanglement with a female lead and eventually die at her hands. The system's words sent a chill down Amy's spine. She stood there stunned, her mind blank. So, even though Ben had faked his death once, he was still destined to walk the original ending. The system watched her dazed expression with satisfaction, indulging in its own mischievous pleasure. Although you couldn't see its expression on the orb of light, the frequency of its pulsating showed its current smugness. Who told her to dare threaten it? Since it was born in this space, it had managed countless worlds, so many that it had long lost count. Just a male lead from a small world. It could just replace him with someone else. The thought abruptly stopped at that moment, and the frequency of its pulsating also suddenly paused. Wait, wasn't what she wanted was to not be the female lead. The system paused for a moment, the data it was loading almost becoming a jumbled mess. In an instant, it went all in with a self-defeating attitude, pretending to glance at the development of the plot, and didn't continue to tease Amy. Oh dear, Ben actually finished his plot 5 years ago and died. Only when she heard this sentence from the system did Amy suddenly come back to her senses. So, what it meant by Ben being destined to die was the same as what Ben had told her at the beginning. She breathed a sigh of relief, but the system's attention shifted to her again. Everything you have now is brought to you by the female lead halo on your body. If you really decide to give up the identity of the female lead, when you return to the real world, you will have nothing. Not every supporting character can have an opportunity like Leo to become the only son of the richest man. If you actively give up the identity of the female lead, someone else will take the position of the female lead, and you won't even be able to leave your own name. Just like Ben. If she was Ben, then she was destined to die. If she was Leo, an insignificant character who had never been mentioned, she could walk the path she wanted for herself. The system thought its words could scare Amy, but who knew she still nodded firmly. I voluntarily give up the identity of the female lead and voluntarily give up everything that came from it. Absolutely no regrets. The system confirmed again, and her answer remained unchanged. Absolutely no regrets. Leo heard the caregiver say that Amy would come the day he woke up, but she never appeared until the day he and Ben's father and Ben's mother were all discharged from the hospital. He originally thought the caregiver was lying to him, but later learned that Amy had been in a car accident, was seriously injured, and almost didn't make it. He was shocked and quickly asked the caregiver to take him to see her. In the intensive care unit, Amy was unconscious, and only the thin layer of water mist on the respirator mask and the beeping electrocardiogram could prove that she was still alive. Hearing the caregiver say that she had lost consciousness while driving on the way to see him, resulting in the car accident, filled him with a sense of guilt. Seeing her again after 5 years, he had never given her a kind look because he said he had never felt her love for him. But now, seeing her lying lifelessly on the hospital bed, his heart ached. When he and Ben's parents had the accident, she had arranged for people to take care of them. But when she had the accident, he only found out after he had fully recovered. I'm sorry, Amy. Actually, he didn't owe her anything. Their relationship back then had been her insistence. It was normal for her to dislike him. Later, she gave up on that relationship, wanting to escape her tragic ending, but she had persistently bothered him. He had harbored resentment towards her because of those 5 years, and he had never taken her indifference to heart. He lowered his head, his voice tinged with a sob, but out of the corner of his eye, he noticed her fingers seemed to twitch. Leo's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly pressed the call button. Soon, a doctor arrived. Amy woke up. When she opened her eyes, the doctor had already left, leaving only the accompanying nurse instructing a man. She turned her head in his direction, and Amy's gaze froze for a moment when she saw that face, Ben. Someone who had died 5 years ago? No, that's not right. She remembered the welcoming banquet the Ben family had widely publicized a few days ago and realized he was the adopted son. She frowned, instinctively disliking the Ben family. Seeing him about to approach, she quickly stopped him. What are you doing here? The familiar yet distant voice startled Leo. He hadn't expected her to react this way. Just as he was about to explain, Leo realized something was wrong. She wasn't Amy, or more precisely, not the Amy from before who had said she liked him and would fearlessly pursue him. She was more like the Amy in the original storyline who loathed Ben. Realizing this, Leo instantly withdrew the emotions from his face. Just checking on you. And thank you for arranging for people to take care of me and my parents after our car accident a while ago. I'll return the money to you. After speaking, he didn't look at Amy's reaction and turned to leave. Walking out of the hospital room, Leo's pace gradually slowed. If the current Amy had become the Amy from the original storyline, then what about the previous Amy? Had she disappeared? He walked out of the hospital with a sense of loss. Ben's parents were already waiting for him in the car. Seeing his expression, they assumed Amy was severely injured and couldn't help but ask a few worried questions. However, Leo shook his head. She's awake, but she probably won't associate with the Ben family anymore. Ben's parents couldn't get to the bottom of it and could only go home first. But when they arrived at the Ben family villa, the car, which should have driven straight into the garage, stopped at the entrance of the villa. Master, madam, young master, there seems to be someone at the gate. Hearing the driver's words, the three of them peeked out with some confusion. There was indeed a thin figure curled up at the gate. Because they couldn't see the person's face clearly, Ben's parents subconsciously mistook the person for a beggar and frowned, preparing to have her driven away. But Leo suddenly had a flash of inspiration and stopped Ben's parents. getting out of the car directly. Seeing Leo heading straight for the beggar, Ben's parents were unable to stop him and had to get out of the car as well. Leo had already stopped in front of the person. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The beggar raised her head, revealing a face he had admired for many years. Seeing it was him, surprise instantly lit up her eyes. "Leo, I told you I would come to you without any obstacles, and I did it. From now on, I'm not the female lead Amy anymore, just Anna. The price, though, is that I have nothing left. So, are you willing to buy me again? Room and board is enough. I can warm your bed." Hearing her say this, Leo immediately understood. Amy was the female lead, and she had to follow her destined storyline. So the Amy who loved him had now become the penniless Anna. He smiled at her and nodded. "Okay, but I have a lot of requirements. If you can't meet them, I won't take you." Anna nodded eagerly. "My young master, I'll make sure you're satisfied." The end.